Hey guys, it's Miss Catapult. Here with your work this week. This stuff isn't too complicated this week. It's not a project like your work last week was. So this week you're kind of covering two chapters. One is Speaking of Courage, and the other one is called Notes. You're not taking notes, but it's called Notes. You're going to be doing some close reading with Speaking of Courage. You've done close reading before. We did it a couple times with The Great Gatsby. And then you're going to be finding, well, you're not going to be finding quotes. You're going to be telling me about some quotes. So yeah. Excuse me. Whew. Here we go. Maybe. It always does this. Delayed. All right. So there are 4 things you need to know. A lot of this harkens back to last week. The first thing is that you only have 3 weeks of school left, including this one. So pretty much halfway through this week, so that's 2.5 weeks. Please don't slack now. Your found poems from last week are a 40-point project grade. Some of you, most of you, have not turned anything in for that, and that's a problem for me. Speaking of found poems, when you're writing your found poem, you can only use words from the chapter you chose. So I've noticed in some of yours, and you're going to lose points for this because you're not following directions, that you're writing your found poems, but you're using words that are not in the chapter that you chose. It's really easy for me to know what's in. I've read this book a million times, so I can tell when you're using words that are not in that book. Okay? Especially because you all like to pick the short chapters, so it's really easy for me to skim and scan for certain words, and some of you are using things that are not in the book. The other thing I wanted to mention about this is that you can only use short phrases. For the sake of this assignment, I told you that a phrase was 4 words, so 4 words in a row. There's literally, I read one poem, somebody took a paragraph and just spaced it out like a poem and probably thought I wouldn't notice. I absolutely noticed. That's plagiarizing, so you can take a 0 for that. So please do your own work, be original. This is not difficult. And then lastly, most of you have Fs. I highly recommend you start doing some work if you haven't already. So, all right, so you have 2 assignments this week. Like I said, one is a close reading and one is a chart. So I'm going to quickly run through the directions and then I'll give you more directions later on. So speaking of courage, this close reading, you're going to read the passage that's on the assignment paper and do the tests that are accompanying it. And then I'm going to walk you through the directions and how to highlight and underline in a Word document later on in this PowerPoint, so there shouldn't be any confusion. If you do not have a computer, I do not have sympathy for you. You should have one by now. So if you have the inability to do this assignment because you never got a computer, that's on you. I don't know what to tell you. So, all right. The other assignment is a quote chart. This one's easy. You're going to read each quotation from the chapter that's in the chart. You're going to then check the most appropriate category for each given quote, and you'll see what I'm talking about later. And then I have left some blanks in the quotes so that you actually have to read the chapter. I will read it to you in this PowerPoint, so you just need to follow along. And they do go in order, and I give you page numbers, so it's not that hard. All right. You need to do the warm-up. I still have people who are not. They're not doing the warm-ups, and it makes me sad. Please do the warm-up. It's not that hard. So all I want to know this week is, do you think the stories and characters in this book are real or fake, and why? So is it fiction or nonfiction? Why do you think that? So you can pause this. You can answer it. All right. Oh, excuse me. So for this assignment, this close reading, you're going to read the excerpt from the chapter. You are then going to read it again and do the following things. You're going to underline 3 words you don't know or are unsure of. You're going to highlight in yellow at least 3 examples of where the author describes characters or settings. At the bottom, you're going to ask at least 2 questions. I don't have questions. It's not good for me. You're going to highlight in pink 2 pieces of evidence that make you believe that this story is real. You're going to highlight 2 pieces of evidence that make you believe that this story is fake. And then you're going to write down 3 possible abstract ideas. If you can't remember what abstract ideas are, I highly recommend you reference the PowerPoint from last week. All right, so let's take a look at this assignment. So this is the assignment, the first one. So here you're going to answer the warm-up. So like I said, you're going to read the passage. This is the passage. It's not long. You're going to read it again and do the following on the second read through. So you're going to underline 3 words you don't know or are unsure of. Well, actually, let's pause. I'm going to read this to you right now. So just follow along. I'll read it right off of here. If you have trouble reading on a screen, excuse me, you can pull up, if you have the book, you can read it in the book. I gave you the page numbers. All right. So this is actually like a flash forward in the book. This is after the war is over, and it's talking about one of the guys. They talked about him in the first chapter. His name's Norman Bowker. It's talking about him and his experiences after the war. All right. Wow, I'm already messing up. The silver star, his father might have said. Yes, but I didn't get it. Almost, but not quite. And his father would have nodded, knowing full well that many brave men do not win medals for their bravery, and that others win medals for doing nothing. As a starting point, maybe, Norman Bowker might then have listed the 7 medals he did win: the Combat Infantry's Badge, the Air Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, the Good Conduct Medal, the Vietnam Campaign Medal, the Bronze Star, and the Purple Heart, though it wasn't much of a wound and did not leave a scar and did not hurt and never had. He would have explained to his father that none of these decorations was uncommon valor. They were for common valor, the routine, daily stuff, just humping and enduring, but that was worth something, wasn't it? Yes, it was, worth plenty. The ribbons looked good on the uniform in his closet, and if his father were to ask, he would have explained what each signified and how he was proud of all of them, especially the Combat Infantry's Badge, because it meant that he had been there as a real soldier and had done all the things soldiers do. And therefore, it wasn't such a big deal that he could not bring himself to be uncommonly brave. And then he would have talked about the medal he did not win and why he did not win it. I almost won the Silver Star, he would have said. How's that? Just a story. So tell me, his father would have said. Slowly then, circling the lake, Norman Bowker would have started by describing the Song Trebong, a river, he would have said, the slow, flat, muddy river. He would have explained how during the dry season it was exactly like any other river, nothing special, but how in October the monsoons began and the whole situation changed. For a solid week the rains never stopped, not once, and so after a few days the Song Trebong overflowed its banks and the land turned into a deep, thick muck for half a mile on either side. Just muck, no other word for it. Like quicksand, almost, except the stink was incredible. You couldn't even sleep, he'd tell his father. At night you'd find a high spot and you'd doze off. But then later you'd wake up because you'd be burying all that slime. You'd just sink in. You'd feel it ooze up over your body and sort of suck you down. And the whole time there was that constant rain. I mean, it never stopped. Not ever. Sounds pretty wet, his father would have said, pausing briefly. So, what happened? You really want to hear this? Hey, I'm your father. Norman Bowker smiled. He looked out across the lake and imagined the feel of his tongue against the truth. Well, this one night out by the river, I wasn't very brave. You have 7 medals. Sure. 7, count 'em. You weren't a coward either. Well, maybe not. But I had the chance and I blew it. The stink, that's what got me. I couldn't take that goddamn awful smell. If you don't want to say any more, I do want to. Then all right, slow and sweet. Take your time. All right. So, your first task here, forgot a period. I'll have that now. You're going to underline 3 words you don't know or are unsure of. So if you don't know how to underline in Word, all you have to do is highlight a word. So let's say you don't know what campaign means. So you just highlight campaign, then you go up here and you hit where it says underline, and that's it. That's all you have to do. All right. So you're going to find 3 words that you don't know or are unsure of. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to highlight in yellow at least 3 examples of where the author describes characters. That's a typo. The author describes characters or settings. So the setting is a place, right? So, and describing characters, we know what characters are. So down here, they talk a lot about this river. So, for example, he calls it a slow, flat, muddy river, right? So what did I say? Highlight it in yellow. So if you want to highlight in yellow, you just highlight it with your cursor. And then this up here, that's text highlight color. So if you hit this drop down arrow, you can choose colors. So I want it in yellow. So you're going to put it in yellow. All right. And then you're going to find 3 examples of where the author describes the characters or settings. All right. At the bottom, you need to ask at least 2 questions. So you need to ask 2 questions about this text. So a question that I might have is, why did Norman Bowker, I spelled his name wrong, Norman Bowker not win the Silver Star, right? He talks about winning it, not winning it all the time. Sorry, my internet disconnected. So I would like to know why. Why didn't he win it? All right. The next thing is you're going to highlight in pink 2 pieces of evidence that, I should say make you believe that this story is real. So just as with the yellow, let's say this isn't the right answer, so just bear with me. Let's say you wanted to highlight this, right? And you think that proves that this story is real. You then would go up here to the drop-down arrow and click the pink one, and then it's in pink. And then you need to find 2 more. Same with the green, so you're gonna highlight 2 pieces of evidence that make you believe that the story is fake. So let's say you don't believe this part about the for a solid week it would rain and it never stopped. I want that in green. So again, you need to go up here, hit the green, and now it's in green. All right. You need to write down 3 possible abstract ideas. I'm going to steal one. You cannot use mine. For example, war is one that I would write down. You can't use it, but you can find other 2. Like I said, if you don't remember what abstract ideas are, you can check the PowerPoint from last week. They're in there. All right. And that's it. That's all you have to do. So when you're done with that, just save it, submit it. It's worth 20 points. Not too complicated. All right, back to this. The other assignment, so quote finding, oh, that's a typo. Fix that. See, I make lots of typos too. All right, so basically, often when your teacher, that's me, asks you to write something, he or she expects that you include quotations from the text. But how do you choose the best sections of the text to quote? I find a lot of times pick really random stuff that has nothing to do with anything. This exercise with quotations taken from notes will help you to categorize text and decide how best to plan using it. When you come across a key sentence or chunk of text, ask yourself the following questions. Is this so powerful that the only way I can convey its meaning is to quote it directly as it is written? Is this meaningful but necessary only to paraphrase or summarize in my own words before citing? And can I summarize this in just a few words rather than quote it? So essentially, you're going to read each quotation from the chapter in the chart below, then check the most appropriate category for each quote given. I left some blanks in the quotes so that you actually have to read the chapter. I'm going to read it to you, so you just need to follow along, or you can just read it on your own. It's totally up to you, and they do go in order. So let me pull up that assignment. It looks like this. All right, this is the chart. I already ran through the directions. So it's going to give you a quote. You need to fill in the blanks. So, and then you're going to tell me whether it's so powerful that you have to quote it directly, so it's meaningful but I can put it in my own words, or it summarizes the plot and I should reference but not quote or paraphrase. So whichever one you pick, you can literally just put an X in it. Okay? That's all you have to do. Alright, so this chapter starts on page 149. Starts on page 149. So if you want to pull up the digital copy of the book, I have a hard copy, so you can pull up this digital copy. This is the one I always link for you if it'll load. So we're reading notes as this one starts on page 149. Let's see. Skipped it. All right, yeah, starts here, page 149. All right, I am going to pull up the assignment just so we can follow along here. All right. So, in the chapter called Speaking of Courage, which you read a part of, it's Norman Bowker after the war, and he's talking about how he lost the Silver Star because he wasn't brave enough, like he didn't do something out of the ordinary that was brave. The situation he's talking about is when Kiowa dies. He drowns in that like field he's talking about. He drowns and Norman Bowker tries to save him and can't. Yeah, so that's kind of what he's talking about losing the Silver Star. He didn't save him, so he didn't win the Silver Star. So the notes is the chapter that follows. Okay, so page 149. Speaking of Courage was written in 1975 at the suggestion of Norman Bowker, who 3 years later hanged himself in the locker room of a YMCA in his hometown in central Iowa. In the spring of 1975, near the time of Saigon's final collapse, I received a long, disjointed letter in which Bowker described the problem of finding a meaningful use for his life after the war. He had worked briefly as an automotive parts salesman, a janitor, a car wash attendant, and a short-order cook at the local A&W fast food franchise. None of these jobs, he said, had lasted more than 10 weeks. He lived with his parents, who supported him and who treated him with kindness and obvious love. At one point, he had enrolled in the junior college in his hometown, but the coursework, he said, seemed too abstract, too distant, with nothing real or tangible at stake. Certainly not the stakes of a war. He dropped out after 8 months. He spent his mornings in bed, and in the afternoons he played pickup basketball at the Y, and then at night he drove around town in his father's car, mostly alone, or with a 6-pack of beer, cruising. The thing is, he wrote, there's no place to go, not just in this lousy little town. In general, my life, I mean, is almost like I got killed over a Nam. Hard to describe. That night when Kiowa got wasted, I sort of sank down into the sewage with him. Feels like I'm still in deep shit. The letter covered 17 handwritten pages, its tone jumping from self-pity to anger, to irony, to guilt, to a kind of feigned indifference. He didn't know how to feel. In the middle of the letter, for example, he reproached himself for complaining too much. So if you flip over to page 149, it says, I received a long, you need to fill in the blank. So the blank here is disjointed. If you really want to help me out, you can like bold it or you can highlight it. Highlighting's cool now that you know how to do it. In which Bowker described the problem of finding a meaningful go old school. Meaningful. Again, if you could point it out to me, that'd be really helpful. Use for his life after the war. So, is this quote so powerful I have to quote it directly? Meaningful, I can put it in my own words, or summarizes the plot and I should reference but not quote or paraphrase. Alright, so personally, I think that this should go here, and here's why. So, is it important? Like, do you need to know it that he sent him a letter? Yes. It doesn't tell you what's in the letter. Well, it kind of does, but not really. It is going to tell you more later. So if you know it's going to tell you more later, you don't need to put that down. So you should reference it saying that he got a letter, but you don't need to put it in your own words, and it's not so powerful that you have to quote this directly. Like, you wouldn't use that as evidence. It just isn't strong enough. All right. This one we can answer too. So it's almost like I got killed over in Nam. This is on page 150. Where'd it go? That night when Kiowa. Again, if you could point that out to me. Not what I wanted. Do pink this time. I sort of sank down in the sewage is the word. That we're looking for. All right. So, and then you would tell me what you think here. Is it this one, or this one? Personally, I think it's this one, and here's why. So it's important. It tells you that Kiowa died. It tells you how Norman's feeling, so it's powerful. You don't really have to quote it directly, but you can kind of summarize it in your own words, and it has the same effect. I wouldn't just gloss over it, and I wouldn't quote it directly, but I still think it's really important. Okay? All right. So I'm going to continue to read. Just follow along, and you can fill these in as you go. All right, page 150, this is where the smaller text is. He didn't know what to feel. In the middle of the letter, for example, he reproached himself for complaining too much. God, this is starting to sound like some jerk-off vet crying into his beer. Sorry about that. I'm no basket case. Not even any bad dreams. And I don't feel like anybody mistreats me or anything, except sometimes people act too nice, too polite. Like they're afraid they might ask the wrong question. But I shouldn't bitch. One thing I hate, really hate, is all those whiner vets. Guys sniveling about how they didn't get any parade. Such absolute crap. I mean, who in his right mind wants a parade? Or getting his back clapped by a bunch of patriotic idiots who don't know jack about what it feels like to kill people or get shot at or sleep in the rain or watch your buddy go down underneath the mud. Who needs it? Anyhow, I'm basically A-okay, home free, so why not come down for a visit sometime and we'll chase pussy and shoot the breeze and tell each other old war lies. A good long bull session, you know? I felt it coming, and near the end of the letter it came. He explained that he had read my first book, If I Die in a Combat Zone, which he liked except for the bleeding heart political parts. For half a page, he talked about how much the book had meant to him, how it brought back all kinds of memories, the Vills and Patties and Rivers, and how he recognized most of the characters, including himself, even though all of the names were changed. Then Bowker came straight out with it. What you should do, Tim, is write a story about a guy who feels like he got zapped over in that shithole. A guy who can't get his act together and it just drives around his town all day and can't think of any damn place to go and doesn't know how to get there anyway. This guy wants to talk about it, but he can't. If you want, you can use the stuff in this letter, but not my real name, okay? I write it myself, except I can't ever find any words. If you know what I mean, and I can't figure out what exactly to say. Something about the field that night, the way Kiowa just disappeared into the crud. You were there. You can tell it. So, as a general side note, if it isn't glaringly obvious to you, Norman Bowker is suffering from some form of PTSD. We kind of talked about this at the beginning, but he's definitely suffering from some PTSD. Norman Bowker's letter hit me hard. For years, I'd felt a certain smugness about how easily I had made the shift from war to peace. A nice smooth glide, no flashbacks or midnight sweats. The war was over after all, and the thing to do was go on. So I took pride in sliding gracefully from Vietnam to graduate school, from King Nai to Harvard, from one world to another. In ordinary conversations, I never spoke much about the war, certainly not in detail, and yet ever since my return, I had been talking about it virtually nonstop through my writing. Telling stories seemed a natural, inevitable process, like clearing the throat. Partly catharsis, partly communication. It was a way of grabbing people by the shirt and explaining exactly what had happened to me, how I'd allowed myself to get dragged into a wrong war, all the mistakes I'd made, all the terrible things I'd seen and done. I did not look on my work as therapy, and I still don't. Yet when I received Norman Bowker's letter, it occurred to me that the act of writing had led me through a swirl of memories that might otherwise have ended up in paralysis or worse. By telling stories, you objectify your own experience, you separate it from yourself, you pin down certain truths, you make up others. You start sometimes with an incident that truly happened, like the night in that shit field, and you carry it forward by inventing incidents that did not in fact occur, but that nonetheless help to clarify and explain. In any case, Norman Bowker's letter had an effect. It haunted me for more than a month. Not the words so much, but as its desperation, and I resolved finally to take him up on his story suggestion. At the time, I was working on a new novel, going after Cascio, and one morning I sat down and began a chapter titled, Speaking of Courage. The emotional core came directly from Bowker's letter, the simple need to talk. To provide a dramatic frame, I collapsed events into a single time and place, a car circling a lake on a quiet afternoon in midsummer, using the lake as a nucleus around which the story would orbit. As he requested, I did not use Norman Bowker's name, instead substituting the name of my novel's main character, Paul Berlin. For the scenery, I borrowed heavily from my hometown. Wholesale thievery, in fact. I lifted up Worthington, Minnesota, the lake, the road, the causeway, the woman and pedal pushers, the junior college, the handsome houses and docks and boats and public parks, and carried it all a few hundred miles south and transplanted it onto the Iowa prairie. The writing went quickly and easily. I drafted the piece in a week or two, fiddled with it for another week, and then published it as a separate story. Almost immediately, though, there was a sense of failure. The details of Norman Bowker's story were missing. In this original version, which I still conceived as part of the novel, I had been forced to omit the shit field and the rain and the death of Kiowa, replacing this material with events that better fit the book's narrative. As a consequence, I'd lost the natural counterpoint between the lake and the fields. A metaphoric unity was broken. What the piece needed and did not have was the terrible killing power of that shit field. As the novel developed over the next year, and as my own ideas clarified, it became apparent that the chapter had no proper home in the larger narrative. Going after Cascio was a war story. Speaking of courage was a post-war story. 2 different time periods, 2 different sets of issues. There was no choice but to remove the chapter entirely. The mistaken part had been trying to wedge the piece into a novel. Beyond that, though, something about the story had frightened me. I was afraid to speak directly, afraid to remember, and in the end the piece had been ruined by a failure to tell the full and precise truth about our night in the shit field. Over the next several months, as it often happens, I managed to erase the story's flaws from my memory, taking pride in a shadowy, idealized recollection of its virtues. When the piece appeared in an anthology of short fiction, I sent a copy off to Norman Bowker with the thought that it might please him. His reaction was short and somewhat bitter. "It's not terrible," he wrote me, "but you left out Vietnam. Where's Kiowa? Where's the shit?" 8 months later, he hanged himself. In August of 1978, his mother sent me a brief note explaining what happened. He'd been playing pickup basketball at the Y. After 2 hours, he went off for a drink of water. He used a jump rope. His friends found him hanging from a water pipe. There was no suicide note, no message of any kind. Norman was a quiet boy, his mother wrote, and I don't suppose he wanted to bother anybody. Now, a decade after his death, I'm hoping that Speaking of Courage makes good on Norman Bowker's silence, and I hope it's a better story. Although the old structure remains, the piece has been substantially revised, in some places by severe cutting, in other places by the addition of new material. Norman is back in the story where he belongs, and I don't think he would mind that his real name appears. The central incident, our long night in the shit field along the Song Trebong, has been restored to the piece. It was hard stuff to write. Kiowa, after all, had been a close friend, and for years I've avoided thinking about his death and my own complacency in it. Even here, it's not easy. In the interest of truth, however, I want to make it clear that Norman Bowker was in no way responsible for what happened to Kiowa. Norman did not experience a failure of nerve that night. He did not freeze up or lose the Silver Star for valor. That part of the story is my own. All right, so you need to go through, fill in the blanks, check a box, do that for the rest, so 3 through 9. All right, the last part, you are going to, after reading this, after reading both Speaking of Courage and Notes, do you think that the characters and stories in this book are real, fake, or a mix of both? Support your answer with textual evidence. Why might an author lie if they don't have to? So here's something I want you to remember. Tim O'Brien, he's the author, he actually fought in Vietnam. The dedication of this book is as follows. This is who he dedicated the book to. This book is lovingly dedicated to the men of Alpha Company, and in particular to Jimmy Cross, Norman Bowker, Rack Kiley, Mitchell Sanders, Henry Dobbins, and Kiowa. All right, so you need to answer this, make sure you have evidence, etc. All right, so remember, you have 2 assignments this week. You need to read the excerpt from Speaking of Courage and do the closed reading test, and then you need to read the chapter notes, which I just read to you, fill in the quote chart, and answer the question at the bottom. You will turn in the assignments separately. They'll be in 2 different spots and focus. Everything is due Monday, May 18th, 2020 at 11:59 p.m. I will add the voiceover and video to my YouTube page. The links for everything can be found here on Focus and on Teams. So that's the link to my YouTube channel, that's the link to the digital copy of the book, and that's the link to the audiobook on YouTube if you don't like me reading, but you still want somebody to read it to you. Turn in everything on Focus. Please don't turn it in on Teams. Please don't turn it in on Teams. Please don't turn it in on Teams. I have to. I'm mandated by Principal Fegans to post everything on Teams as well. But I want you to turn it in on Focus. Turn it in on Focus. Turn it in on Focus. So yeah, that's it, guys. Let me know if you've got questions. I'm willing to help. We're in the home stretch, so hang in there. I miss you guys. I love you so much, and I will catch you next time. All right, bye.